we've raised a lot of goats, and the goats sometimes will get sick. They get costive, you know. If a goat's not pooping, then there's a problem, you know. So when we noticed that our goats were, you know, kind of making this sound, you know, we would pick some. Oh yeah, I do have goat speak actually. We would pick some comfrey leaves and we'd rub them, because goats, like most animals, don't like to eat spiny, prickly stuff. So you rub it, and then that gets rid of the prickles, and then you feed that to them. Well, usually, you know, before you rub it, you try giving it to them so that you don't have to rub it if they're going to eat it just the way it is. Sometimes they will, and that invariably took care of the problem. And so, you know, there's this kind of second nature that is really good to cultivate, where, you know, your second mind begins to tell you that there might be something wrong. That's when you use the herbs. You know, don't like wait for the problem to be acute, or for the acute problem to become chronic. Then you've got all this metabolic garbage that you have to, you know, move through in order to make the herbs function. So we would just give the goats the comfrey right away, and they would eat comfrey a lot more. You know, they have their own native wisdom, and they would although sometimes I really questioned that. But they would eat the comfrey more readily when they were going to get sick than they would if they just were normal, you know, normal goat feed. Then one day this one goat, his name was Joey, was always very, like, extremely thick-headed. Like, he would butt his head time after time into the wall of the goat shed until the wall broke. His head didn't break. One day he learned to unlatch the door to the gate to the goat enclosure, which was large enough for the goats, and they could kind of stand on their back legs and get oak leaves from time to time, and then the leaves would grow down again, and then they'd clip them off again. And that roughage is just the best thing for goats. I mean, if they're getting costive, it's because they haven't had enough roughage, really. So that's the alternate therapy to giving the comfrey, is you cut down some madrone leaves, and madrone trees, and you throw those in there, and then they eat the leaves, and then they eat the bark, and then they eat the wood, and then they're fine. You know? Just like us, we need that roughage in our diet. That's why a plant-based diet is so important. All that roughage just, you know, courses through our bodies, and it pulls the toxicity out, and so we can cheat it a little bit, and we can eat some dairy and some meat and some other and some other quotes unquote, you know, inflammatory dietary ingredients, you know, foods, and then at the same time we can go ahead and get rid of that toxicity. So, you know, if you eat the poison, then also eat the antidote at the same time. It makes a lot of sense. Don't wait. Anyway, comfrey is an amazing plant. You know, back to unlatching the gate, just real quick. You unlatch the gate, and the whole goat herd, for once, acted as one. And they all left the gate, and they all ran down the driveway. And there was a beautiful tree that we had planted right in the middle of the old driveway, because we like to take the other way around. And so the straight driveway that went into the house became a tree, and then the driveway itself went around the tree. This was great until we started getting deliveries from, like, large, you know, carriers, and they would swear at us for having to try to veer around the semi-trucks around the tree. It was not easy. Well, it wouldn't have been a problem if the goats had realized what they really wanted to do, because the tree wouldn't have been there anymore. They immediately started stripping the bark off of this wonderful Cedar of Lebanon that we planted, and by the time we got to it to drive the goats away, and we were right on it too. I mean, it wasn't like we were somewhere else watching TV or whatever. We were out there on the land, and we drove the goats away, and they had eaten everything around the entire tree except for one tiny little, I think maybe it's about a 3/4 inch strip of bark that went from the bottom of the stripped off place to the top of the place where they hadn't stripped yet. The rest of it was just gleaming white, meristem. It was a Cedar of Lebanon.
Oh.
Yeah, Citrus Lebani, a true cedar. And we don't have those in the New World. You have to go over to the Middle East to get them, and they're really worth it. Anyway, we got the goats put back away. The way you do that is you don't chase the goats around. You go into the goat enclosure and you shake the green like this. If you've ever had goats, you know these things. They're, a goaty personality is somebody who, is very hard-headed and does everything their own way. So you don't take the obvious, try to whip the goats into shape. You just go and jiggle the grain bucket, and they all come running back. And then you close the door and you close the gate and you put a piece of wire around the gate this time. And so then we returned to the tree and we were all sort of devastated. And I had this comfrey salve that we'd made. And when you make salve, when you're really a salve maker, you put it in these little tins and then that uses up about 1/3 of your batch. And then the rest of it, you're like, what am I gonna do with all this salve? So of course it was in this large bucket full of green waxy salve, and we took great hands full of that, and we put it all over the injury of the tree. And my thinking in it was, well, first of all, there's comfrey in there, so there's a cell proliferant, so it can proliferate the growth of the bark, and also the wax and the oil will keep that little bridge of life from drying out, So then we took pieces of cotton sheets and we wrapped around the whole tree where we put. It wasn't really applying salve. It was more like a salve poultice. It was about 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick, and then we wrapped again to keep it from drying out. And we waited, and the top of the tree never did go brown. And the tree, continued to grow. And after a while, I'm curious. I'm poking to see if maybe, my little bridge of life is maybe not getting a little bit bigger. And it seemed like maybe it was. And then after a year or so, we unwrapped everything, and it had repaired the bark all the way around the entire tree. And now that tree it's about this big around. And it's as tall as Cedars of Lebanon get, which is, 40, 50 feet. And it's made a lot of cones, and if you wait long enough for these green upright cones to dry, then eventually they'll kind of split apart, and the seeds will come down on their little wings, and you can collect the seeds. And a lot of times, I'm a lazy gardener. I look for where the trees have come up all on their own, and so we've dug up many seedlings from under there and potted them up and sent them out to people, and that's all because of comfrey salve. So not only does comfrey contain that allantoin that proliferates its own growth and the growth of other tissue, but it also contains a resolvent activity. So when I say resolvent, what I mean is something that resolves necrotic tissue, dead tissue. And this is not really available in the literature. This activity of comfrey is not really available in the literature. I discovered it in the garden because I dig a lot of comfrey. And I dug up a comfrey plant one time. And the root had hit a piece of plywood and then gone to the side and gone off, and again, seeking gravity, it had gone down again. And I took the plywood up in my hand and I looked at it, and the root had actually dissolved a furrow in the plywood. I mean, it was obvious. It wasn't a furrow that was there before. It had been dissolved by the comfrey root. And so I said, well, that's really amazing. Comfrey even eats formaldehyde. you know, and so it's resolving the dead tissue of the carbon of the wood, and then that made me realize that there's this other activity, the Comfrey Root, which is it's going to go in, find dead tissue, and dissolve it. So that's going to clean up any kind of separating matter. It's going to clean up any kind of inappropriate growth that's in a lesion. It's going to reduce it to basically raw tissue and healthy tissue. And that's really what you want to do. That's the whole point of, for instance, Epsom salt therapy, which is another really great adjunct for any kind of a infected sore or deep puncture wound. You know, you want to use Epsom salt therapy to create an osmotic, imbalance and pull out any kind of inappropriate debris, purulent matter, to clean it out. And of course that brings us to the one caveat about Comfrey therapy too, which is that you don't want to use a Comfrey Poultice on a deep puncture wound, because what will happen is you'll stimulate the reparation of the skin on the outside, but the wound may not be completely clean on the inside. So a wound like that needs to be cleaned from the deepest point, from the inside all the way up and out. So you want to use that hot Epsom salt therapy, where you basically what you do is, it depends on where the lesion is, but say it's on your foot and you stepped on a nail, which is really common, and a common cause of septicemia, and a common cause of going to the hospital, which is a common cause of death. So you want to try to like shorten the process, not of death, but of healing, by using the Comfrey Poultice, or by using the Epsom salt therapy in this case. So you get yourself a bucket of hot water, and you put 3 cups of Epsom salts in there, swirl it around until it dissolves, and then you have a cold bucket right next to it. And you put your foot in, or it's your kid, usually it's your kid. Mom, there was a nail sticking through the board, and I tried to bend it over with my foot so nobody'd get hurt, and then it went right up in my foot. That is kid wisdom. Versus goat wisdom. How about kid goat wisdom? In any case, you want to start with that therapy. You keep it in the hot Epsom salt water for as long as you can keep them occupied, 20 minutes or so at best, and then cold plunge. So you have this kind of osmotic pump going on. You've got the hot water, all the tissues are swelling and getting bigger and pushing things out, and then you put it in the cold water for just a short time, and all the tissues go ee, and they tighten up, and then you go back into the hot again, and then back into the cold, and you renew the hot and the cold. And the more attention you put to that the first time through, then the less trouble you're going to have later on. Question?
Does the cold water have Epsom salts as well?
The question is, does the cold water have Epsom salts in it as well? No, it's just cold water. Yeah, because the Epsom salts really dissolves great in hot water. So that's the Epsom salt part of the therapy. And then after that, you're not going to really use a Comfrey Poultice on a deep puncture wound like that. You're going to use a Comfrey Poultice on a bed sore that won't heal. You're going to use a Comfrey Poultice on a finger that's been smashed and is all bloody. You're going to use a Comfrey Poultice on athletic injuries. You can use Comfrey Poultices on arthritic joints or on broken bones to, after it's been set by a doctor and you've returned successfully from the hospital, then you can use a Comfrey Poultice, not on the outside of the cast, but you can use a Comfrey Poultice when convenient to, they don't call it knit bone for nothing. Yes?
You mentioned cyst.
the question is, would a cyst be a ganglion cyst? Would Comfrey help with a ganglion cyst? And so I think a ganglion cyst is not really usually treated with a Comfrey Poultice. What I was talking about in terms of cyst was like a pus-filled cyst, something of that nature, or a pimple, as it were, grown to mega proportions. We're actually in the part of the country where the main treatment for ganglion cyst is also used commonly, which is Bible thumping. Yeah, you just get them to put their hand out there on the table, and then you thump it with the Bible, and you can just knock it right out of there. So then the third aspect of Comfrey in terms of its healing is clearly the soothing aspect. It has the soothing mucilage, the mucopolysaccharides, that are going to soothe any injury and will make it feel better. This finger right here is a case in point. You can see that it's slightly larger than the other finger. It should have had stitches and it didn't get them, so it ended up being a little bit bigger than the other one. But my son and I were unloading this stock fencing from a truck, and he's really burly and strong, so he grabbed more of them than I did, but I had my fingers through it, and when he pulled, basically it was kind of like a cheese cutter sort of thing to the end of my finger, and I was jumping up and down and yelling, and he looked at me and he goes, "Really?" This is the kind of support you get from your siblings. Really? You're going to cause me the trouble of having injured yourself here? You know, and it was very bloody and impressive, and so I went right into the greenhouse where there's a big drum full of these Comfrey pieces, and there was a rock on the bench in the greenhouse, and I put the unwashed Comfrey right down on the bench, and I smashed it with the rock, and I took the smashed goo and I put it all around my bloody finger, and then I took some packing paper that was there, because we're packing plants ready to go out, and I folded with one hand, it wasn't easy, I folded the paper into a strip and I wrapped that around my finger, and then by the time I wrapped the packing tape around that to hold it all together, I was pain-free. So it was about maybe 45 seconds between the injury to getting into the Comfrey, and then about maybe a minute or so to the point where I was pain-free. So the greatest thing about Comfrey is it works. And this finger is just fine now. Yeah, after I took off the bloody poultice, then I washed it, and my son looked at it and he said, "You should have stitches in that." And I said, "I think I'll go back to the Comfrey." So yeah, I've used it so many times on so many different injuries on myself and on other people. So I think we've covered it in terms of, you know, the indications and the contraindications. You don't use it, you know, to heal, you know, vaginal sutures. You may just heal the vagina shut. You know, you don't use it on a deep puncture wound, like I mentioned before. You will heal the surface tissue, and you may end up with a cyst. Yeah, you don't want that. So, as with any herbal therapy, level-headed approach. Try to just do things according to your common sense.